Hello and welcome to yet another tutorial by Davies Media Design. My name is Michael Davies, and in today's tutorial I'll be showing you how to create a 3D text logo wrapped around a sphere. Don't worry if that sounds super difficult, it's not going to be. I'm going to walk you through it in a way that's very simple to understand. I'll be using GIMP version 2.10.18, which is the latest version of GIMP at the time of this tutorial. Before I get into that, don't forget to check out my website at daviesmediadesign.com. I have tons of tutorials, ebooks, and help articles on here, so definitely check that out. You can enroll in my GIMP 2.10 Masterclass from beginner to pro photo editing on Udemy. You can enroll in any of my Skillshare classes by visiting gimpschool.com, and you can get more with a premium membership to Davies Media Design. I'll include all the relevant links from this tutorial in the description of the video. So here is the final composition we'll be creating for today's tutorial. Everything I'll be using for this tutorial is built directly into GIMP. It does not require any plugins. So let's dive in here. I'll start by creating a new composition. So I'll go to File, New. This one's 1920 by 1080, but for this one I'm just gonna go 1000 by 1000 and click OK. And actually the one thing that's not built directly into GIMP is going to be the palette I'm using for today's tutorial, but I will have a link to the palettes that you can download from my website in the description of the video. I also have a tutorial on how to install palettes in GIMP if you're not sure how to do that. But to open the palette dialog here, the palette tab, go to Windows, Dockable Dialogs, and come down here to Palettes, and then double click on the palette you want to use, double click on the thumbnail here. So here are all my colors for this tutorial. The next step is we want to create our sphere, so I'll come down here and create a new layer, and I'm just going to name this sphere, and make sure it's filled with transparency, and click OK. Next what I'll do is I'll use the / key on my keyboard, and I'm going to type in or start to type in sphere, and here the first option, it says Sphere Designer. We're going to double click on that. So I'm going to reset this because this has my previous settings, but this is what this is going to look like by default. I don't really like the teal shading that's going on here, so I got rid of that. So to tweak this, what we're going to do, we're going to start first with the bottom light, and I'm going to change this from a teal color, a dark teal, to something more like a dark gray color, and click OK. And I'm also going to play around with the position of this. So the position X, Y, and Z are what I'm interested in. And I'm actually going to leave this for now. Let's first come over here to the other light layer, so the top light. And I will move around the position of this one first. So just try the X, Y, and Z axes when you're moving this around. And basically my goal is to get this thing to be as centralized on the sphere as possible, like so. I also want to turn down the amount because it's way too bright on here, so I'll come over to the amount slider and bring that down until it fades to that nice gray color so it looks more smooth. Now let's go back to that bottom light layer and adjust the position of that other light, so now we can see that better and get that in a position where we want it, so about right there. And if you want, you can also adjust the amount of light on there. Now we have a much more smooth sphere. And I'll come over here and click OK. So here's our sphere. We need to scale this down though, so I'll hit Shift S on my keyboard to grab the scale tool. Make sure the transform mode is set to layer, and just scale this down until you get to a size you want. In my case, I went somewhere between 450 and 500. I'll go with about right there and click Scale. So now we have our sphere. Next, it's time to add our main text. So obviously you want to use whatever font that you like. In my case, I went with the Century Bold font. So I'll hit the T key on my keyboard or grab the text tool from my toolbox, click on my layer, and I'll just type a capital M in my case. That's what I want to use. So you can see here I'm using Century Gothic Bold. I want the text to be approximately the same size as the sphere. So first I'll hit Control A to make sure my text is selected, and I'm going to increase the size of this. So we'll start with somewhere around there for now. Let me come over here and grab my Align tool, click on this text, and just align it relative to image to the center. So it's still a bit small, so I'll hit the T key again, double click on the text box to select this, and we'll just increase this a bit more. We'll go to 500. And by the way, you can always change your font by coming over here and scrolling through the fonts. Keep that in mind. So once again, I'll grab my alignment tool, click on the text box, and align this to the center. And now I'll hit the M key on my keyboard to grab the move tool. For the next step, we want to warp the text around the sphere, and this is going to be the first step towards making this look 3D. To do that, I'll start by enlarging the layer that this text is on. So make sure this is the font you want to use before you do this step. But now I'll go to Layer, Layer Boundary Size. I'm just going to enlarge this layer because it's going to help with the actual warping we're going to do with a certain tool. So I'll first link this little icon here, and in my case, I increase the size of the width to 600, hit the tab key. That will make this off center, so hit the center button to center that back up, and then come over here, make sure this is set to fill with transparency, and I'll click resize. Now that that's resized, I'm gonna go to Filters, Distorts, Spherize, and you'll see this will make the text appear as if it is warping or wrapping around a sphere. And if I wanted to increase the amount of warping happening here, I can increase the angle of view, and you can see what's happening there. It's just bulging that out a bit more. And by the way, make sure your mode is set to radial. So about right there looks pretty good. And I'll click OK. If we didn't increase the size of the layer, there would be some artifacts that would start showing up whenever the text here is about to hit the edge of that layer, so that's why we resized it. Next, we're going to get started on making this look 3D. So for starters, I want to duplicate this text layer. So I'll come over here to my Layers panel, click the duplicate icon. So here we have our M copy layer, and I'm going to hit Shift S because I want to scale this. So now I'll just scale this down by clicking and dragging this in. It should automatically scale inwards towards the center, and make sure your little chain link is locked here inside the scale dialog there. And you want to decrease this based on the amount of a 3D effect you want to have. So if you want a ton of 3D effect, you can scale this way down. If you just want a little bit, just scale it like so. Now I'll come up here and click Scale. So we've got our two text layers. Next, we're going to sort of manually make this look like it's 3D and also in perspective. So to start this off, I want to change the colors of these two so that they're different colors temporarily. So to do that, I'm going to lock the alpha channel, and then coming up here to my palettes, I'm just going to drag a random color on here. We're not going to use this in the final, but this will help the bottom layer stand out. I'm also going to move this layer below the big M, and I'll come back up top here to the big M layer and just decrease the opacity. This is going to help us with drawing the little 3D lines. Now what I'll do is I'll create a new layer, and I'll name this Bevel because this is going to be sort of a beveling effect like you see in 3D text. Fill it with transparency, click OK. I'll hit the B key on my keyboard to grab my Paths tool, hold Control and zoom in. And now what we're going to do is we're going to connect the points that you see here. So I'll zoom in a bit more with my mouse wheel, and I'll click to create my first point. And for now, I'm just going to keep these as straight lines. We're going to come back, and I'll come up top here. We'll connect this point to this point, and you can always zoom in. And I'll hold Control, create a union between that last point we drew and the very first point. So now all those points are connected, which is helping us build up this side, but the curves aren't right, so I'll hold Control, zoom in. If I hold Control and click and drag this out, it'll create a handle, which creates a curve. And if I hold Control and click this way as well, it'll also create a handle going this way. So that can help us bend that in, make it look more realistic. I'll hold Control and zoom out with my mouse wheel. Let's come up top here, click on this node, hold Control, zoom in. This doesn't look too bad. It doesn't have to be perfectly aligned because we are going to cover it up, but I'll hold Control and click just to tweak this slightly. And then I'll come over to this node here, hold Control and drag. And then we'll scroll down here, hold Control. So that's going to adjust this one. We'll get that out of the way. Hold Control, click and drag to create a handle. And let's zoom out here. So we can always click on this square to adjust the handle. And same with right there. So that looks pretty good. Once we've done one of these, we can always just copy this over to the other side so we don't have to do it all over again. So to do that, I'll come over here to the Paths tab, and I'm going to just duplicate this path we just made and unhide it. Then I'm going to hit Shift F on my keyboard to grab my flip tool. Make sure the transform mode is set to path and make sure this is set to horizontal. And I'll just click on this once to flip it. Hit the M key on my keyboard to grab my move tool. Change the mode to path. And I'm going to drag this over while holding the control key to drag this in straight line mode until we get it in place there. And you can always hold control and zoom in a bit. Once again, it doesn't have to be totally perfect, but it does have to be pretty close. So hold control. I think that's going to be fine there. So you can always unhide this and see now we have both sides of this. Lastly, I'll come up top. We need to do the same up here. So I'll hit the B key to grab my paths tool. Hold control, zoom in. So you can start wherever you want, but I'm going to start up top here. So just click once and come down here. You can always drag a guide like so, and then click where you place that guide. That's just going to make it easier for the second half. Hold control, zoom out, use my space bar to move over. Hold control, use my mouse wheel to zoom in. Click to create that node. Hold control and click to create a union. Now we need to create the curves here, so hold control and I'm just going to drag this first curve. Hold control, drag the second curve. And let's come down here, hold control, click and drag this handle. That looks pretty close. Now I'll do this bottom one, hold control. And this is actually the wrong one, so I'm going to drag this straight down so it snaps to this guide. If it's not snapping to the guide, go to View, Snap to Guides. But now I'll hold control and we'll click and drag the second handle here. Come up top, hold control, click and drag, and so this is going to be the other handle. So let's hold control, click and drag again. Get that curve right. And now let's adjust this curve here. Hold control, zoom out. So that looks pretty good. Now we can come over here and duplicate this, unhide the duplicate. We'll hit Shift F to grab the flip tool and click to flip this. M on my keyboard to grab my move tool. Hold control while I move it over in straight line mode and hold control, zoom in. So this one, for whatever reason, always is off. So I'll grab my paths tool, click on this, and you can always click on the individual nodes to just adjust them slightly. I'll hit Control Z. For some reason, I can never get this one aligned properly on the first try. But that's good enough, so hold Control, zoom out. So now we can unhide this one as well. And there you can see we have all four sides. And because over in our layers panel, we still have this bevel layer, I'll come back to my paths tab. And now I'm going to hold my shift key and come over here and click this path to selection icon. And while holding the shift key on all of these, I'm going to do the same thing. So there we have all of our sides selected. I'll come back over here to the layers panel. And in this case, I will start using the real color. So I'm going to use my dark blue I want to use. So I'll come up top here and grab the darkest blue that's in here. It's either this one or this one. I'll just go with this one here. So I'll just drag and drop it either directly on the layer or directly on the composition, either way. And I'll hit Control-Shift-A to deselect it. So now I'll come over to my Paths tab and let's just shift-click on the Show Hide icon and then click on this last one to hide all those paths. Hit M on my keyboard to grab my Move tool. And let's come back to the Layers panel. Now we want to drag the bevel layer below the big M layer, so I'll click and drag that. And we can come back up top here to the big M layer and increase the opacity. So there you can see what this is looking like. There's some gaps here, but that's all right. We're going to cover those up. So now that we have all of our main design elements, it's time to start adding in the colors we want to use for our final composition. So keep in mind while you're doing this part that you want to use your final colors. I'll start by coming over here to my big M layer and I'm going to lock the alpha channel. Then I'll hit the G key on my keyboard and I want to set my foreground and background colors to a blue and light blue color. So I'll come up top here. We already have this dark blue as my foreground color, which is fine for now. And I'll come up top, control click on this lighter blue. That'll set that as my background color. And because we have the alpha channel locked on this, now we can click and drag this and it's only going to color in the parts of this layer that already have pixels, which in this case is our M. And we can drag this up a bit. I do have this set to radial gradient, by the way. If your colors are in the wrong order, you can always flip the gradient, but I do like having the lighter portion out front here. Once you're ready, click on this endpoint and hit the Enter key. That will apply your gradient. I do like having this dark blue color here, so I'm gonna leave that. But I wanna add a stroke to cover up the gaps. So to do that, I'll come over here and create a new layer, and we'll name this one Stroke. Fill it with transparency and click OK. Then we'll come over here to our M layer and Alt-click on it. So it's not our active layer, we just created a selection from the layer. Then I'll come over here to my Paths tab, and we'll convert this selection to a path. So here it is. I'll hit Control-Shift-A to deselect it. In my case, for the stroke, I used a whitish color, so I'll come over here and click on that color. And if I click on this, you can see the HTML notation I used for that. And now I'll come over here and I'm going to stroke our path. And for this one, I'm going to make it a solid color, and I'll switch the line width to 5. Make sure the line style is set to line, and click stroke. So now we have our outline there. I also added a stroke to the beveling parts here. So to do that, come over to the layers panel once again, and we'll create a new layer. This one I named Bevel Stroke. Fill it with transparency and click OK. Then what I'll do is come back to the Paths tab, and we're just going to shift click on each one of these paths that has to do with the beveling. And I'll skip over the M, come to this last one. So we'll come over here and convert all of these to a single path. So all the selection areas are now on their own path. Control-Shift-A to deselect that. Now I'll come over here and we'll stroke this. In this case, I'm going to make the stroke slightly smaller, so I'll go with a 3 width instead of the 5, and I'll click stroke. So there we go. Obviously, this is not in the proper location. So I'll come over here to the layers panel, and I'm just going to click and drag this below the M, the big M. And actually, we can delete the little m here, so I'll just delete that. Hold Control, zoom out. So lastly, what we need to do is color the sphere and color the background. So let's start with the sphere. We're on that layer right now. And I want to use this red color here, or at least a variation of it. What I'll do is go to Colors, Colorize, and I'm going to click on the color here. We can click on that red. So that's the HTML notation for it. I want it to be a bit darker though, so I'll come up to the red slider and drag that down. Maybe about right there, and click OK. And we'll click OK again. Lastly, we're going to color the background as well as add a bit of effects to this. So I'll come down here to the background layer, and I'm going to start by grabbing my Move tool, so M on the keyboard, change this to layer mode, and move this guide out of the way. We're going to create a more precise guide, so go to Image, Guides, New Guide by Percent, and we'll go with a vertical guide at 50%. And I'll also go to Image, Guides, New Guide by Percent, and we'll do a horizontal guide. So I'll hit the G key to grab my gradient tool. And so I've got this red color here as my foreground. I'll control click on this darker red color for my background color. And now on the background layer, we're going to click and drag the gradient from the center there. And let me just swap the colors on here. So switch the colors up. And you can always drag the midpoint out if you want to. And I'll hit the Enter key. Couple of final steps here. So for starters, I want to add a little drop shadow below the actual graphic here. So I'll come up top and I'm going to create a new layer. I'll name this Shadow, hit the Enter key. Then I'll come up top and grab my Ellipse Select tool, and we'll draw an ellipse. And we're going to try to make this about the same size as the graphic. And you can always drag this and it'll snap to that guide. That's how you know it's nice and centered. Shift B on my keyboard to grab the Bucket Fill tool, and I'm going to switch my colors to black and white, fill this in with black, Control-Shift-A to deselect it. Then we'll go to Filters, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and increase the blur, like so, and I'll click OK. I can then turn down the opacity of this if I want to, just to lessen that effect. And lastly, what I'll do is create a new layer, name this Vignette, hit the Enter key. I'll go to Filters, Light and Shadow, Vignette, and let's increase the radius, and I'll click OK. So hit the M key, let's move these guys out of the way, and there is our final logo. All right, so that's it for this tutorial. Hopefully you liked it. If you did, you could check out my YouTube channel at youtube.com/daviesmediadesign. Don't forget to subscribe and click the bell icon to be notified each time I have a brand new tutorial. You can also check out any of the links to my resources in the description of the video. But thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.